Sit down. Okay, great. So as Jay said, basically, bit of a red rag to a bull situation. You ask us a question, we're going to try and answer it. It's very grand, don't be scared. I'm going to talk about silly grand things for about 10 minutes and then we're going to build into our work. This is ideas from various people. If anybody wants to know more about where stuff comes from, then sort of ask us afterwards, but I'll just sort of go through the points for the moment. Okay, so starting with a quote, this is Tim Ingold. Imagine a film of the landscape, shot over years, centuries, even millennia. Slightly speeded up, plants appear to engage in very animal-like movements. Trees flex their limbs without any prompting from the winds. Speeded up rather more, glaciers flow like rivers, and even the earth begins to move. At yet greater speeds, solid rock bends, buckles and flows like molten metal. The world itself begins to breathe. Thus, the rhythmic pattern of human activities nests within the wider pattern of activity of all animal life, which in turn nests within the pattern of activity for so-called living things, which in turn nests with the life processes of the world. Grand. So, the forms of the landscape are made through movement. Everything from sort of you or I picking a flower to the slow buckling and movement of the tectonic plates. And all of these movements are congealed in this solid medium, which is the landscape. So, what is the landscape? The landscape is a record of millions and millions of movements congealed. The landscape is a story. I think we hear this word a lot at the moment, and you mentioned it as well, the landscape as a story, of a chronicle of all of these movements, of all of our lives, of everything. This kind of gloopy record of everything that's happened. So if we're going to define landscape as a story, we thought we'd better define story a little bit. Telling a story, it's not like it's weaving a tapestry and laying it on top of the world, sort of bunging loads of human culture and metaphor and symbolism on top of some sort of natural passive thing. And I have a suspicion that landscape architects have a much healthier attitude to this than architects, who tend to think that they do put culture on top of something natural. But telling a story is a way of editing and guiding listeners to the things that you want them to understand, sort of focusing their attention and editing down this sort of massive amount of information that is everything, and finding something that makes sense to humans. Delving into the world and dragging something out that humans can understand. This is diving in, see? We're familiar with the idea that we don't ever add anything to the landscape, but we're just sort of moving stuff about. And more, the more we sort of talk about the environmental sustainability agenda, this becomes more and more we're more and more aware of this as we're trying to move things around as little as possible. But there's still this kind of lingering idea that we're inscribing something external, something innately human onto the world. And I think that's a bit conceited, really. I think we need to take ourselves off that pedestal and consider that landscape formation is really, it's a process of incorporation. It's not giving a light dusting of humanness. It's being part of it, being part of the world, sort of doing itself. This game came out excellently. So imagine that aliens drive past the Earth. Imagine that these aliens perceive time much more quickly than we do. So for them, what seems like a year, for them just seems like a second. And so for them, the whole Earth would appear as this whole organism, just sort of squirming about one single thing. And humans would just be this like fuzz, like mould on the surface. And human action wouldn't seem like action onto a passive world. It would just be a small part of the world's transforming itself. Okay, so we're mould. That's okay. How can we be good mould then? As architects, designers, landscape architects, how do we decide what good mould should do? Well, luckily we apparently speak the language. This is an Alistair McIntyre idea that human beings are storytelling beings, that we live our lives as narrative quests. I can only answer the question, what am I to do, if I first understand the question, what story or stories do I belong to, do I find myself a part of? So this sounds a little bit abstract, but it's the idea that you think to yourself, what should a person in my position do? Or, in dating terms, what baggage do I have? it's important that this doesn't mean that we have no free will. It's just simply that we have a context. We have stuff, baggage, good and bad, and even from when we're born already, we've got a past before we have our own. So, in terms of sort of being successful, we're quite familiar with this idea that it's not just about who you are and your innate talents. It's about being in the right place at the right time to a certain extent. Right time, right place, and sort of geography is sort of where you were born and everything that comes along with that. And being born at the right time, that kind of your particular talents are valued. And I think we all know this, but perhaps underestimate the true extent of it. So, if we make sense not just of our own lives, but of everything through this use of a kind of narrative, of understanding where we fit in with great sort of the larger stories and writing our own stories, this is through narrative form. And I just wanted to illustrate this by think about how much more history you learn from a good film, like The King's Speech, which we watched the other day, which is excellent. If you haven't seen it, go and watch it. It's much easier to remember history when it's presented in this way, that it makes sense to you. It's, compare that to sort of sitting down and trying to remember sort of a list of dates or something. It's incoherent. But we learn and understand things through stories. We understand other people's stories and we make up our own. And when we're figuring out what to do next in any situation, whether it's a moral dilemma or a design decision or any kind of decision, we're considering which decision, which outcome will best make sense of things as a whole. So back to landscape. Sometimes people like to think of the perception of the landscape as kind of looking at a giant map in our heads. So to make decisions about changing the landscape, we have to draw more maps and plans and sort of this kind of detached process. But according to our idea of landscape, the idea of landscape as a story and ourselves as storytelling beings, that's a load of rubbish, really. It's not about pinpointing vectors from sort of detached position, like we're playing a game of snakes and ladders and sort of we're a counter on a board. Really, we see ourselves and our lives from inside our bodies, doing things and deciding as we go along, as we go about it from within our own vantage points. We tell our own little short stories from our own vantage point, and they fit into the big story of the world transforming itself. So, the landscape. The landscape is a congealed form of all these stories. And yes, this is a jelly of the United States of America. So, now we're going to talk a bit particularly about one project to sort of illustrate that point in more detail. And this project, Freya and Robin, which we did for up in Kielder in Northumberland, is very explicitly a congealed story. This was part of our initial proposal to the client, where we gave him a synopsis of a story and we illustrated it like this. So let's just go back a little bit.
It's a very interesting site. It's right at the border with Scotland. You go to Newcastle and you have to drive for 3 hours. Driving through a beautiful English countryside we all know and we dearly love. And you get to this point and you suddenly hit Canada. Every trees are same species. Can you get the next slide? And they are planted by hectare and they get chopped down every 10-15 years and they become pulps or boards for the construction. And this whole area was completely remade during 80s when the reservoir came in. This is the largest man-made reservoir in Europe. It's about 8 miles long and a mile in width. It really illustrated the point that all the landscape that we perceive as this natural setting actually has been touched and molded, and in a way that how we shape the same as small scale buildings or small scale external space. So rather than placing an object that what you would conceive as a natural environment, we decide to use that whole thing as our site and take advantage of where you are and what brings this site, what this site is telling us. So we decided that we will really embrace this really forefront the version of being a man-made. It's really made and molded area, and we told client that we will use this as a background for a play, and we will write a story and and whatever physical proposal we make is either become a part of set or is a memory of the story has been told.
So the first thing we did with the idea that we wanted to write a story is to ask the client, because he asked us to make one shelter, and we asked him if we could do two, because then you would be able to set up a relationship between two things, which is always great for a story. So I'll go back one slide. In consultation with the client, we found two sites, one on this side and one just over there. Yep. And the two sites are very different. They're quite close in terms of they're less than a mile apart, but to actually walk between them, it's about 27 miles. So that's twice all the way around. It's about 14 miles. So they're very, very close together and yet very, very far apart at the same time, and they have a relationship with each other. And the two sites are very different. And in order to set up this narrative, we personified the two sites. Reminded me a little bit about your plants, Zeus and all that. So one site is very open. It's not got very many trees around it, actually, for the area. The sun streams from behind it. The sun streams from behind it, and it's just sort of this open, welcoming. There are flowers and things like that. So this site became Freya. Freya is a goddess. She likes to collect flowers. She likes elves. She likes to press her flowers and decorate everything that she has. And then the other side, it's much more secluded. That side is sort of closer to the road and to the visitor centres. The other side is much more secluded. It's a lot more dense forest around there. And so that site became Robin. And Robin is a bit of an elf. He likes to he lives in a little small hut that he built for himself, just very simple. He spends most of his time outdoors. And basically the story is that Robin was living there over the side. Freya saw him from her side of the river, the sun streaming that way, lighting up his part, and she fell in love with him. And she decided that she wanted to build him. She saw his little hut. She decided she wanted to build him a magical little cabin that would entice him to come over and see her. So she used all the technology that she knew. She knew about flower presses and flower stems, and the other special thing about Freya is, which we borrowed from the Norse goddess Freya, is when she cries, when she's really, really sad, she cries tears of gold. So she made this little cabin. That's Robin's cabin on the left, Robin's hut, and Freya's cabin on the right there. She made this cabin in the image of what she thought he would like most. So inside, it's like a forest, because there's not much forest there, but he's going to get a bit agoraphobic. So she's made him a sort of enclosed space. It's like a forest inside. It's the same size as his hut. She's balanced it up on flower stems so that he can see it, because she wants him to come over. It's made with flower press technology, so it's all made of layers that are held together with these springs, just in the same way as a flower press. And basically every single decision was then, every sort of materialisation, sorry Christian, every congealment, if you like, of the story, was made through this decision of the story, which sort of started off with the site.
Well, right from the beginning, we decided we're going to go to nth degree to use this story for everything, and it should based on every single decision is made. Obviously, there are decisions that you make because a character you start to build on, characters take on his life, and there are so many people involved in a project, like project managers, engineers, and a client, and the stakeholders, and other people start to engage with the story, and story kind of evolved through the time. And also to talk to the local authorities, like planning department. Our planning application was actually written by Freya. We said, because I want to do this, I know this materials available on the site, and I can do this. So everything was technology, how it was built. Our technical report was basically based on this story. Every single part was described through how she would have done it, although it's really high tech. So to balance that, the story of making the project at the beginning and actual realization, that is certain parallel process we had to go through. That's very much a practical side of, can we build this within the budget? How are we going to do it? Is this going to stand there for 15 years? And how are we going to manage all this? This little cabin, I think that's the most high-tech detail we probably ever do, because it's a flower press. You wouldn't normally construct it this way, because it's very difficult to get all the moisture out. So we decided we're going to let it soak and let it swell over the period of time. So the whole thing swells 150 mil. So it's anchored in the center, and it's sitting on the ski, and it does this accordion movement throughout a year. And all the details to make the claddings and things, so forth, it becomes very complicated.
There's an important point that after Freya had finished making the cabin, because of the way that the sun goes that way, actually it's very difficult from Robin's side to see clearly onto Freya's side. And she saw him getting in the boat, and she thought he was coming over, but it turned out he was off on he couldn't see the cabin. So she was so upset, and she cried and she cried and she cried until she was crying tears of gold, and then she wraps the cabin in the tears of gold, and then of course the tears of gold reflect the sun, so he can see it, and he comes over and it's happily ever after. So these gold tears became really, really important, because, you know, from literally, you know, from over there, if you want to be able to see this, you need to get that kind of glint of the sun. Gold tears, gold flower stems became really important, and you know, every conversation that we had about sort of in trying to realise it, we had the project managers and the engineers really defending, we've got to have Freya's gold tears, we've got to find a way to do this.
And also at the beginning, the client was very worried about how he going to get this through the planning process, because they had to do a public consultation, and our site was most exposed out of all 5 proposals. Others are hidden in the trees or far off the bushes, and ours was right there, and people could see it right from the visitor center. And it's unusual material, very shiny, and normally doesn't quite go down well in the public consultation where people are not used to see it. So again, we met residents, and we read them story, and that was it. They just fully understood why it had to be like that, what was aesthetic, the value it had to create, because it was laid out there for them to completely understand, and what it was for. Whether it's not hugely functional reason, but they were engaged, and they were making the stories up about the Freyas and all the discussing, including the structural engineer. The rationale of those stems were literally a sesame seed sprayed on the paper. So everyone just started to embrace it.
So just go through the construction quickly. Robin's hut, we didn't want to draw it too much, because we wanted to have as much the feel as possible of somebody who's built it for themselves. So we did a few sketches, but then we found this guy who's local to the area. He's called Gavin Tremble. He's a local carpenter, and he became Robin. And he did all of the detail design, and he did a brilliant job. He's a telegraph pole pile foundations, and it's Douglas fir frame and shingles. And that was brilliant. Freya's was a bit more complicated. It's made as a giant puzzle. It's all CNC'd out of spruce plywood, which is, we use this nesting software so that, you know, you're wasting as little material as possible. So even though they're sort of quite large parts, it's all made up of the really small puzzle parts that can be fitted together nicely. Then there are the stems in the top. These are the stems before they were gold. So these are the quite heavy-duty springs. Should put something in there for scale, but
got about that big, about that long.
Because to sort of contain her as she breathes. Here are her golden tears going up onto the site, onto the cabin. So there was a lot of prefabrication, and then on the site itself, there was no road to get to there, but it's forestry commission land, so they're not really too afraid of building a quick road.
Bulldozer, digger.
Just temporarily. It's
2 hours.
Done. So that was the site beforehand. Quick road. This is stems coming into place, and then these parts were mostly carried across. I mean, one element isn't very heavy.
And from before we went on construction, we got in contact with a lady from what society was that?
I don't know what you're talking about.
No, the flower lady.
Oh.
What society was that?
Did she ever do it?
Yeah.
Well, can't remember. A wildlife
I can't
trust up
remember.
there.
Yeah, one of the wildlife trust lady who's really interested in the flowers and species, and she wanted to plant certain species around it, and we gave her the story, and the story actually had Freya's favorite flowers, which are native. So she decided to plant it around the site.
There you go. Going up. And there it was in the snow last January. So that was that project really. And this was one of our first projects, and we really wanted to explore really what a story could do, how much of the design process and communication process and procurement and construction and everything, how hard a story could work. And we're completely inspired by the context of this sort of bizarre man-made nature issue that we thought we really wanted to embrace, rather than sort of just ignore the fact that, oh yeah, the landscape's man-made, but you know, we wanted to really embrace that. So since then, we've done a few other projects, and we're sort of I'm not sure how long you want us to talk for, but we'll just go through a couple of them quickly.
This is the competition we won about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. At the moment, it's hibernating because when the competition started, they aimed for 2017. So we still have a fair amount of time, and you know, with this day and age, we never know when it's going to start, or it may not. This is a site up in Blackburn, behind the big shopping mall they put in 70s, right?
I think it was the 60s or 70s. Basically, Blackburn, I don't know if any of you know it, but they ruin their town centre completely in that they bulldoze it and put up this mall, which closes quite early. So basically, if you want to go to the town centre, you're skirting around this enormous enclosed thing, which is obviously a big problem for all of the public realm around there. And they've tried to sort of make this ring of public spaces around it. And this was kind of the last chunk in that. Well, there's a little bit more down, but all around this side it's all done.
There's no formality on site. Everything kind of out in the corner. It's a huge junction, a lot of traffic, and there was. Well, we had two minds at the beginning. One is that you go for quite traditional approach. Let's make it hard landscape and make a civic space. And it just wasn't doing that, and they've done a lot of work around the other side of the shopping mall, which is all hard landscape with the few lonely trees are dotted about, and it just wasn't going. This space was never going to be better than any of those spaces. So rather than doing, losing version of what it can be, we thought it should be the best version of what it should be and what it can do.
Yeah, so basically we didn't want it to compete as a formal hard urban landscape, because it can't, and it shouldn't. I mean, they've got some great trees on site, they've got level changes and a bit of water, which is a bit weird. And so we wanted it, yeah, as Jay said, to be the best version of what it could be, which led us down a slightly different route from the other competition entries. So we were working on the design process just as sort of Freya was coming to life in sort of real life. So we basically took the idea that a little boy, this is a story, a little boy finds a mirror on the floor of the shopping mall, and he looks into the mirror, and he can see just in the mirror that there's these kind of trees taking over the shopping mall, and then he looks back behind him, looks normal, he looks again, the trees are sort of growing, and he follows it just by looking through the mirror, and he follows a route out into the garden, discovers the secret landscape. And basically this provided us with a parallel to designing a landscape through a series of vistas. So the mirror was kind of like the clawed glass, which I suppose you probably all know about, but it's a clawed glass is basically a mirror that a landscape painters would use. It's slightly concave and it's slightly sepia, so that you would paint the landscape that you see through the mirror rather than the actual landscape, so that it would provide you with this kind of picturesque version of the real landscape. So he finds this. We should call it Claude, actually. Anyway, Claude finds the mirror, And each one is a borrowed view from a kind of a typical kind of view. So you've got kind of the interlocking spurs view, the Stourhead view. There's a Stourhead view.
Another thing to quite mention is that we didn't design this on plan at all.
No.
We set up the viewing points where you're coming into this space or going out from this space. That everything set up, the view was set up first, how this view should be, with the background of this towers, as you can see at the at the back, and surrounding
Blackburn
buildings which are not in grid. So it just didn't make sense for us just looking at the plan, trying to find any rational out of it.
Yeah, I mean, very crudely, we knew this was a lumpy space and we could get it to do various things.
Yeah.
So we started off with the kind of basis for these drawings, which was these 10 little sketches of these different vistas that we wanted to create, and then just found a way to sort of make the set that would allow all of these things to happen. Congeal it together. Which, and sort of, we obviously did a plan at the end, it sort of turns out like that, but you can't really see the contours very well there, but it creates those 10 views.
Again, when we presented the competition to the panels, we read them the story, and this is what we're going to see. This is what you have to have back of your mind while we're going through over 100 pages long technical document, because this is not just landscape in its natural state. It's a highly engineered landscape to make everything work. So all the soil composition and how they're built and their components had to be written out, so we can convince them how we're gonna sustain the water on site without using too much energy, and all of those technical aspects. We collaborated with a landscape architect called Mesh Partnership.
And one other thing about this project is I think after one of the things we learnt through doing Freya was that it's not just about your interpretation of the story. Once you write the story, what's really powerful about that is that a lot of other people can interpret it. So we worked with a children's book illustrator whose obviously her job is to read stories and illustrate them. So and we worked very closely with her, and these are her drawings, Henny. So and sort of to have her kind of level of interpretation on top of that was another sort of added layer.
Well, it's an interesting thing. It's what Christian said. The client would get a lot more out of it if he gave him the trust and let him make the decisions. We try to do that for all our projects, including project manager and engineers and clients and in much broader spectrum.
Mm.
If you try to draw everything and dictate every single process, people just stop responding. It just does not work out. So we try to find other way to engage people, trying to get coherent understanding of the project before we proceed with anything.
So this is the longest bench. This project doesn't have a story in the kind of most explicit way that not all of our projects have stories, not always appropriate. But we thought we'd talk about this because when Pat invited us to talk 4 years ago, I think we decided it was in the end, talk here, this project was just in its infancy.
Yeah.
And we've just completed it, so we've not got very long left, but we'll just run through some images of it. It's for the longest bench in the UK, which is down in Littlehampton in West Sussex. And it's a bench and 2 shelters. That's the site before we did anything to it. There's a low red brick wall down on the right hand side there that runs for about 600 metres near the Thomas Heatherwick Cafe, and a couple of shelters here that are they're not there anymore, but were pretty nasty, stank of piss. You could find needles in them. So the council wanted to get rid of those, make something that was much more open and connected the beach to the space behind it. So we did a bit of site investigation with some local primary school children who did these long fantasy proms. We did a prototype. This was a long process of sort of having an initial idea and then going to try and find funding for it. We did an initial prototype with a bit of seed funding that we had, which was unveiled on Newsround, which is really, that's the shot on this shot down here. That was really exciting.
It's like a magic.
And I said it's like magic, yes. The original design was to be made out of these kind of ice cream colours using enamel. But then that was proving too technically demanding and too expensive and going to take too long. So we found this amazing timber yard in Essex where they've reclaimed a load of groins, amongst other things, but a lot of seaside groins that were made from this tropical hardwood, sort of in the 60s and 70s, the kind of stuff that you don't want to use now. You know, they've probably caused extinctions, but now that they have and it's done, there's a lot of wood there that we can, once you sort of get the nasty bits off the outside, you actually get it to the heartwood. It's gorgeous stuff, and it's also, because it's been dunked in seawater for 30 years, it's really well preserved as well. So that was a brilliant find. So we made the bench out of that.
Except being hardwood, once they're fresh cut, they stink.
They smell really bad of dog poo.
For about 2 weeks, completely aired out.
But if you find yourself in Littlehampton now, they do not longer sell a dog shit.
No, I really felt sorry for the guys who are milling it, really.
Yeah, it's hard for them. So here it is going in. Basically, it's made of loads and loads, about 7,000 of these bars. They're all the same length, and it's just figuring out the geometry. Basically, we didn't want to sort of career through the site and try and make it into a straight line. So we set up a way to, we worked with AKT to work on scripting to make this sort of a very gentle curving form that would respond, it would get out of the way of lampposts and duck behind the bins. And then the two shelters became these two giant loops of it's mild steel and then it's spray coated in zinc and then aluminium bronze.
Yeah.
There's the other one going in. And then when the bench, the sort of the journey of the bar, gets up to the shelter, it goes inside and it goes haywire, jumping off the walls. This is the framework of the bars, and they're the bars inside, the squiggle, as we were calling it. And then there are also some coloured bars that are a polymer enamelling process, so that basically every time it goes past, it does something interesting. Every time it sort of ducks down or divides up, it bursts into colour. And there it is. 4 years later.
This is one of our first projects. We don't really have time.
We've run out of time.
Yeah.
Here's some projects that we've done.
I think you can take a little bit more time, really.
Yeah.
This is
our London Festival of Architecture experience.
yeah. This is our first ever project. 2006. We fundraised to do this project as our final year project as a degree student. The brief was, site was given to us in sort of a workshop situation, and we've done initial design, and we had to find the pupils' willpower and their generosity to work all this out. This is made out of 140 boomerang-shaped timber CNC cut Curto piece. These pieces are generally for the engineering project, the large, long span beams used in supermarkets and things. This was to exhibit clay sculpture that made by children. We had, because the brief was you had to work with the children in some way or form. This is where the first time we actually wrote the story. We had this site. We had no idea who the lady in the middle was, so we tried to find out history of it. Yeah, so we basically made it up. We called her what is her name? Allah. Yeah, and we wrote a story, Biddenborough, which is a subterranean water world underneath of London. We made a lot of historical reference of plague and things. So she's representing. This is the kind of channel of where all the species would pop out. So we asked the children to make these sculptures, and lots of weird, wonderful stuff came out.
I think that's two heads.
Yeah, I think that's a wing and something. We had a lot of these, and anyway.
Yeah, well, there was supposed to be 140 to go in each of the 140 niches, so we worked with 140 children, but most of them made two.
Yeah.
So, and we also got some little donations like this little dude who just showed up on site. Also, it was 2006 World Cup, so there are also some footballers. but that's okay.
So, as a self-initiated project, you rope in your friends to come up to the barn and help you making it. You pay £20 at 6 o'clock in the morning to the butcher at Westmithville Market to borrow his forklift, so we don't have to take it down one by one. Everything was built kind of threaded in a rod situation. It's quite high engineered without doing much of a calculation, really. Very touch and go process. We didn't know how many columns we will need.
Yeah, a bit. So it was like this but finished for 2 weeks in West Smithfield for the festival, and then after those 2 weeks we took it apart and we remade the boomerangs into street furniture, which basically one of the ways that pretty much the way that we fundraised this was to take a £140 donation for each of the 140 boomerangs, and the City of London bought half of them. And we gave them to them, obviously, and so they went into a few places in the City of London, and then we had other private donations, sort of people buying one or two, and those ones went into the three playgrounds of the three schools that took part. It's on the left. It's us building it on the left, and we also made an 88% version for an exhibition, which is now in our garden. So that was that project. This is another project that we did. It was for a competition, refurbishing that into that. Short
It's
story.
again, we wrote a story. If
It's
you're
another love
curious,
story.
it's actually written quite elaborately on our website.
Yeah, if you have to know. We've done some work for a school campaign in Camden to try and help them find a site for a school.
Which is successfully done. Legally
Yeah.
now that site is educational use.
This is a model that we made in Christian's workshop for biscuits. Chocolate biscuits, the chocolate model. We made it. And yeah, this was for a Urban Splash competition, and we didn't win the competition, but it did get into the Royal Academy show, and won a surprise, so that was nice.
That prize money kept us going for 6 months.
Yeah. Some public furniture we did with Ella Kishimoto, who also made Jay's jacket. These are print designers, very cool. Which we did for the 2008 festival, which we made ourselves with Janie. And that was sort of all together in Somerset House for the launch kind of weekend, and then it went out all over the place. And now they've been given away to sort of various places, sort of gardens and things all over the world. Apparently, there's some in Shanghai, and it's crazy.
Yeah, some went to Ireland and
They
Japan.
flat pack, so
Yeah, they just went places.
This was a building opera that we put on with some children who made themselves into buildings, and then we put on an opera, Tale of Two Towns. This is a project we did for Glastonbury Festival last summer, which is the burning remains of a skyscraper. Sort of working with the visual effects guys was very cool. Putting lights and smoke and everything to try and make it look like this thing, which looks sort of quite benign during the daytime, like it's really on fire. And sort of with the guys who are putting projections across the space and everything, you get some really cool effects. And this is in the Shangri-La field, which is basically the after party of Glastonbury.
Yeah, that was 2 o'clock in the morning. I was pretty pissed. I'm very proud of myself taking the photo, actually.
Yeah, it's a good job.
Radio 1 was running the rave night for whole night, so that was at the beginning of that.
So that crowd of people is...
He's
This was a
standing on the
tough
pinnacle.
project because we had like no money, and it had to be so robust to like have these crowds on it, but then it also had to look sort of halfway decent when there wasn't anybody on it. It was also a crowd control thing, so that you could have people actually sort of watching the stage and things without people careering straight through the middle. So it was quite a demanding project.
But still, the moral of the story: if Glastonbury asked you to do something and wave his staff past you, do it.
Just do it, yeah. There it is again, blazing.
We do workshops during the summer called Studio in the Woods.
This summer one coming up again. If anyone's interested, it's long weekend workshop. You make stuff with the wood.
You don't know what you're going to make, you just
No.
knock it up. We wanted to make something tall, so
That's 7 meter tall without any any lifting.
You've got
gear.
no gear, so we made this
Yeah.
kind of pinwheel thing, and
Touch.
hoisted it up, and then
Yeah.
sort of clad it. And that whitewash is just chalk mixed with water and kind of hammered into the front of it. So that's the formal facade, apparently. Less formal than that. And you can put fire inside. Oh,
We are doing a couple of projects with City of London at the moment. This is going on site in about 3 months' time, 3-4 months' time. It's a little small land,
pocket
Be-
garden.
pocket garden behind the James Sterling building at Bank
Behind Cheapside.
and Cheapside. We are collaborating with City and Guild College, who are historic carving department, and we're giving them freedom to carve all these elements however they want it. So we have meetings with them to go through all that.
So yeah, that goes back to again what we were saying.
Yeah,
Christian
collaboration.
started,
That
trying to
people
give
do.
people a bit of autonomy, and then you get great results. And that's all for now.